The ballroom cost $3 million to rent for one night, and every person inside it knew exactly who paid the bill. Dominic Caruso stood at the center of the room like a man who had never once in his life questioned whether he belonged somewhere. 6'2", silver cufflinked, hair brushed back with the precision of a man who controlled everything within arm's reach and most things far beyond it. He was 44 years old, the undisputed head of the Caruso crime family, and the single most powerful man in the state of New York. Or so said every intelligence file, every federal agent's nightmares, and every newspaper that still had the courage to print his name. The Hartwell Charity Gala was held every November in the Grand Meridian Hotel on Fifth Avenue. Politicians came, hedge fund managers came, judges came. Prosecutors who had once tried to put Dominic away came, and shook his hand and laughed at his jokes. That was the kind of empire he had built. Not built on shadows anymore, built on marble and light, on donations to children's hospitals and endowments to university arts programs, all of it a gilded frame around a canvas painted in things nobody discussed at charity galas. The room sparkled, chandeliers like frozen waterfalls, gowns that cost more than most people's cars, champagne flutes that never seemed to empty. And standing near the service corridor by the east wall, almost invisible in a plain charcoal blazer and dark trousers, holding a small notepad and a press credential from a publication called the Manhattan Culture Review, was a woman nobody noticed. Her name was Elena Vasquez, and she had been waiting 11 months for this exact night. Elena was 31 years old and looked to anyone who glanced her way like exactly what her press badge said she was. A junior culture journalist covering the gala's art auction for a small but respectable publication. Average height, dark hair pulled back simply. No jewelry beyond a slim watch. She wore flats. She carried a pen and a notebook like a shield, because in rooms like this, the easiest person to ignore is the one who appears to be there to serve you in some form. She had perfected the art of invisibility over the past year, because Elena Vasquez was not a culture journalist. She had been once a federal prosecutor, Assistant United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York. One of the sharpest legal minds her office had seen in a decade, they said. She had built complex RICO cases the way other people build cathedrals, with patience, precision, and a belief that what she was making would outlast her. She had gone after organized crime with a particular ferocity that her colleagues attributed to ambition and her supervisors attributed to brilliance. What none of them knew, what almost no one still living knew, was the real reason. 11 years ago, Elena's younger brother, Marco Vasquez, was 20 years old and working as a bartender at a restaurant in the garment district. He was studying architecture at night. He was going to be something. He had that particular brightness about him, the kind that makes people in a room turn unconsciously toward you like plants toward a window. Marco witnessed something he wasn't supposed to see at that restaurant. A meeting. An exchange. I had a man given a name and an address by another man, and then that named man turning up dead 48 hours later. Marco went to the police. The police told him to keep his head down and his mouth shut. Marco went to the FBI. The FBI opened a file. 3 weeks later, Marco Vasquez fell from the roof of his apartment building. The medical examiner ruled it a suicide. There was no note. There was no history of depression. There was, however, a receipt from a florist placed on his doorstep the morning he died. A bouquet of white lilies, unsigned. White lilies were Dominic Caruso's signature. He sent them to funerals. He sent them to people he wanted to remind of how close they were to needing a funeral. It was a thing the FBI knew. It was a thing they had never been able to prove. Elena had spent 11 years turning herself into the kind of person who could prove it. She had resigned from the federal prosecutor's office 6 months ago, quietly, citing burnout, filed no complaints, made no accusations, disappeared for all official purposes from the legal world. And then she had spent 6 months building a different kind of case, not one she intended to file in any court, one she intended to deliver to a specific journalist, a specific set of documents, a specific recorded conversation, all of which required her to be in this room tonight, because the one piece of the puzzle she had never been able to secure, the one thing that had collapsed a federal case against Caruso 9 years ago, was his alibi for the night Marco died. Dominic Caruso had claimed, and 3 witnesses had confirmed, that he was at a private dinner at a restaurant in the meatpacking district the night Marco fell from that roof. The restaurant was owned by a man named Gerald Stein. The dinner was verified by a reservation, a credit card receipt, and 3 signed affidavits. But Elena had found something. Gerald Stein had died 2 years ago. Natural causes. And in the process of his estate being settled, boxes of his personal records had passed through a storage facility in Queens that a retired accountant now ran. A man who had, without fully understanding what he had, handed Elena a handwritten log Gerald Stein kept of private dining reservations, payments, and something Gerald apparently called his insurance file. Gerald Stein had been paid $40,000 in cash on the same night as that dinner. The log entry simply read, DC, cover, and it was not enough on its own, a log entry from a dead man. But it was the beginning of the thread, and tonight there was someone in this room who Elena believed held the other end. His name was Raymond Hollis, 63 years old. Former city councilman, current political consultant, and one of the 3 men who had signed an affidavit confirming Dominic Caruso's alibi on the night of Marco's death. Raymond Hollis attended the Hartwell Gala every year. He was on the board. Elena had spent 3 weeks crafting the right approach, the right moment, the right words to get Hollis to give her something he didn't realize he was giving. She had not planned for Dominic Caruso to notice her. It happened at the art auction. Elena had positioned herself near the back wall during the bidding portion of the evening, close enough to observe Hollis at his table without drawing attention. She was making careful notes, real notes, legitimate ones about the auction pieces, because a convincing cover requires actual work, when she heard a shift in the ambient noise of the room. A slight parting of the crowd, a change in the atmospheric pressure the way it changes before a storm. Dominic Caruso was moving through the room, and the room was rearranging itself around him the way water rearranges around a stone dropped into it. He was flanked by 2 men in suits who never smiled and never looked at the art. His wife, a beautiful, quiet woman named Claudia, moved at his side with the practiced grace of someone who had learned precisely how much space to occupy. He greeted people. He laughed. He placed a bid, a stunning one. He 6 figures for a mid-century abstract piece. And the room exhaled with impressed approval. Elena tracked him with her peripheral vision without turning her head. And then, somehow, his gaze snagged on her. She couldn't have said why. She was no one. She was holding a notepad. She was dressed like a graduate student at someone else's formal event. But Dominic Caruso had built a life on noticing things that didn't fit. And something about Elena Vasquez, perhaps the quality of her stillness, the precision with which she was not looking at him while being very much aware of him, snagged something animal in his attention. He excused himself from his companions and walked toward her. Elena's pulse jumped. She locked it down, looked down at her notepad, made a note, underlined something. "I don't recognize you," Dominic said, and his voice was pleasantly pitched, cultured. He had learned over decades to make his voice sound like the interior of a luxury car, smooth, expensive, no rattles. Elena looked up with the mild, slightly flustered expression of a person who has just been addressed by someone significantly more important than them. Elena Vasquez, sir. Manhattan Culture Review. I'm covering the auction portion of the evening. Dominic looked at her press badge the way he might look at something stuck to the bottom of a very expensive shoe. Manhattan Culture Review, he repeated. Yes, I've never heard of it. We're boutique, Elena said. Someone nearby, one of Caruso's associates, a younger man with too much product in his hair, laughed at that. Boutique. The word hung in the expensive air with a thin coating of condescension. Dominic didn't laugh, and he studied her. You're near the service exit, he said. The press area is on the other side of the room. I was trying to get a better angle on the lighting for the Harrington piece, Elena said, nodding toward a large canvas on the east wall. The track lighting creates a glare from the center. It was true. She had made sure it was true. She had studied the room layout for 2 weeks. Dominic tilted his head slightly. Are you a photography journalist or a print journalist? Print, Elena said, old-fashioned. Then you don't need an angle on the lighting. He said it quietly, without heat, the way a cat says something with its tail. Around them, conversation had dimmed just slightly, the way it does when people sense that something is happening nearby, something with an edge to it. Elena offered a small, self-deprecating smile. You caught me. I just liked the painting. Dominic looked at the painting, then at her. He seemed to make a decision. This event is invitation only, he said. Press credentials are approved in advance by the Hartwell Foundation's communications office. He paused, just a beat. I sit on the board. I approved this year's press list personally. He let that land. Then he said pleasantly, I don't recall a Manhattan Culture Review. The associate with the product in his hair had stopped smiling. He was now watching Elena with the flat attention of a man calculating something. Elena felt the room tighten around her. She was not technically exposed. Her credentials were real. She had spent considerable effort making them real. The publication existed. She had written 3 articles for it under a pen name, and the Foundation's press list had been compiled by an administrative assistant who had not cross-referenced every small outlet as carefully as she might have. But Dominic Caruso was standing in front of her, and Dominic Caruso did not become Dominic Caruso by missing things. Perhaps I slipped through, Elena said. Perhaps, he said. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he raised his voice, not dramatically, not cruelly, but loudly enough to be heard by the nearest cluster of guests, which included 3 city commissioners, 2 federal judges, and a news anchor from a major television network. Could someone from the Foundation's events team escort this journalist to verify her credentials? He said it the way you might ask someone to remove a piece of luggage left unattended. We can't have unverified press at a private event. It's a liability issue. The silence that followed had a specific texture, the kind that comes from 100 well-dressed people suddenly deciding not to look directly at something uncomfortable. Elena stood very still. A young woman in a headset materialized from somewhere with the efficiency of someone trained for exactly this kind of situation. Ms. Vasquez? Right this way, please. Elena looked at Dominic Caruso, and she smiled. It was a small smile, completely calm. The smile of someone who is, in fact, holding better cards than anyone at the table realizes. She said 3 words. 3 words quietly in the way you might say something intended only for the person standing directly in front of you. The way you might say something that you know, with absolute certainty, the other person will not be able to unhear. She said, Gerald Stein's log. The room continued around them. Glasses clinked. Someone across the ballroom laughed at something. The auctioneer at the front was introducing the next lot, a sculpture from a Scandinavian artist, and reading the provenance notes in the practiced, theatrical cadence of his profession. None of it reached Dominic Caruso. He had gone very still, not the stillness of a man who doesn't understand what he's just heard. The other kind. The stillness of a man who understands it perfectly and is calculating at high speed exactly how much danger he is in. Because Gerald Stein's log was something that was supposed to no longer exist. He had been told by a man whose specific job it was to ensure such things no longer existed that Gerald's personal records had been destroyed after Gerald's estate was settled, and there had been a fire at the storage facility in Queens. A contained one, documented, attributed to an electrical fault in the climate control system. 73 storage units had been affected. The records were gone. That was what Dominic had been told. Elena watched the calculation move across Dominic Caruso's face like weather. She saw the precise moment the stillness cracked, not outwardly, not visibly to the room, but she was close enough and had studied this man long enough to see the micro-shift in his jaw. The way his eyes went 1 degree colder and 2 degrees more focused simultaneously. She let the young woman with the headset begin to guide her toward the corridor. She took 4 steps, and then she heard behind her, "That's fine, Melissa. Ms. Vasquez is my guest." The young woman stopped, looked back. "Mr. Caruso? I must have missed the culture review on the press list." His voice was light again, smooth again. "My oversight. Please see that she has whatever she needs." Dominic came to her. Not immediately. That would have looked like something. He waited 12 minutes, spoke to 2 other guests, laughed at a joke, bid on 1 more piece in the auction. And then he crossed the ballroom floor toward the east wall where Elena had returned to her position near the Harrington painting. He stood beside her, looking at the canvas. "You have something that belongs to me," he said. "I have a photocopy of a log," Elena said, "and the original is already somewhere you can't reach." "A photocopy of a dead man's bookkeeping." "A dead man's bookkeeping that documents a $40,000 cash payment made on the same night that you claim to have been at his restaurant. For a dinner that 3 men swore under oath you attended." She paused. "Do you know what the interesting thing about Raymond Hollis is?" He said nothing. "He's been diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer," Elena said. "He found out 4 months ago. And men who are facing the end of their lives sometimes develop an urgency about their legacy, about what they leave behind." She glanced briefly toward Hollis's table. "We had a very interesting conversation last week." This was the other piece. This was the part she had been working toward, and now she watched it land. And because the 3 affidavits were the alibi. But affidavits signed under duress by men who were afraid are not the same as truth. And a dying man who has spent 9 years carrying the weight of a lie he was coerced into. A dying man who has been told gently and carefully that there is a path to a legacy that does not include that lie, is a different proposition than a healthy man with everything to lose. "Raymond Hollis was not at that dinner," Elena said. "He was at home. He signed the affidavit because you had people who knew where his daughter lived. His daughter was 19 years old at the time." She kept her voice level, quiet, conversational. "He has never stopped thinking about the young man who died that night, the architecture student. He told me he keeps a photograph." Dominic Caruso looked at the painting. For a long time, he looked at the painting. "Who are you?" he said finally. And Elena turned to face him directly for the first time. "My name is Elena Vasquez," she said. "Marco Vasquez was my brother." The chandeliers poured their light down on the room. The auction continued. Somewhere a phone rang and was quickly silenced. Claudia Caruso was laughing at something 3 tables away, her head tilted back, graceful. Dominic Caruso stood in the ballroom he had paid $3 million to inhabit for one night, surrounded by 100 of the most powerful people in the state, and felt the floor move beneath him. Not because Elena had exposed him. Not yet, not here, not tonight. But because he understood in this moment, even with the particular clarity that only comes when something you buried deep enough and long enough rises back to the surface. He understood what had actually happened 11 years ago to a 20-year-old boy who had been bright and hopeful, and who had done what he believed was the right thing. He understood it not as an abstraction, not as a tactical problem that had been managed. He understood it as a human thing, a specific human thing with a name, Marco Vasquez, and a face he had never seen and would now be unable to stop imagining, and a sister who had spent 11 years becoming exactly the kind of person capable of standing in this ballroom and saying 3 words that destroyed everything he had built to protect himself from that night. "What do you want?" he said, and it was the question of a man who still believes this is a negotiation. "I want the truth on record," Elena said. "Not a court case. Not your prosecution. I gave that up. I know what happens in courtrooms with men like you. I spent a decade learning it." She paused. "I want Raymond Hollis to be able to sit down with a journalist I trust and tell the truth about what he signed and why. I want the medical examiner's report on Marco's case reviewed by an independent forensic pathologist, and I want those findings published. And I want you to know, every day for the rest of your life, that I am the reason that happens." "That's not justice," Dominic said. "That's a personal statement." "Yes," Elena agreed, "it is." Something moved across his face. Something she had not seen on Dominic Caruso's face in any photograph, any surveillance footage, any courtroom sketch. Something that was not calculation, not authority, not the managed performance of a man who has learned to wear power like a second skin. Something that looked very much like shame. "He was 20 years old," Elena said, and her voice, which had been steady and precise through this entire conversation, shifted. Not to anger, not to tears, but to something rawer. Something that had been waiting 11 years for this room. "He used to call me every Sunday. Every Sunday. He would tell me about his classes, about the buildings he was drawing in his sketchbooks. He wanted to design schools. He said schools should feel like places where something good was possible. He said most of them felt like places where you went to wait for your life to start." She stopped, and he was 20 years old, and he saw something he wasn't supposed to see. And he tried to do the right thing, and then he was gone. The ballroom sparkled around them. A waiter moved past with a tray of champagne. Dominic Caruso did not take a glass. He found her again near the exit 40 minutes later. The gala was winding down. Coats were being retrieved. Cars were being summoned. The auctioneer had closed the final lot, and the room was beginning its slow, elegant dispersal into the Manhattan night. Elena was buttoning her blazer, her press badge tucked away, her notepad in her bag. She looked like what she was, a woman leaving a place where she had accomplished what she came to accomplish. "I need to know something," Dominic said from behind her. She turned. He looked for the first time she had ever seen him in any context. He like his age, not 60. He was not 60, but he looked like a man who had been carrying a weight long enough that the weight had started to show in the architecture of him. "Did he suffer?" Dominic said. "The fall. Did they say?" "It was ruled instantaneous," Elena said. She watched him. "I used to tell myself that mattered, that it made it smaller somehow, that it was something." She paused. "It's not something," she said. "In case you were going to tell yourself that." He didn't answer. "The man you sent," she said. "The man who went to Marco's building. I know who he is. He's been dead for 6 years. You're doing, I assume, one of those internal housekeeping situations you people manage?" She looked at him without any particular feeling on her face. "I don't have enough to prosecute you. I never did. And that's why I stopped trying that way." "Then why tell me?" he said. "Why come here tonight? You could have given Hollis to the journalist without ever walking into this room." "Because I needed you to know that I know," Elena said. "I needed you to understand that there is a person in the world who has spent 11 years making sure that Marco's death is not just something that was managed and filed away and forgotten. He existed. He mattered. And the person responsible for what happened to him knows that someone, one person, held on to that fact long enough to put it in front of him in a room full of people he controls." She looked at him for a long moment. "He would have designed beautiful buildings," she said. "He would have built schools." She picked up her coat from the cloak check, and she walked out of the Grand Meridian Hotel and into the cold November air of Fifth Avenue, and the door closed behind her, and the sounds of the city rose up around her. Taxi horns, wind between the buildings, the distant percussion of a city that never stops. And she stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed. The story ran in the New York Examiner 43 days later. It was not on the front page. It was a long piece, the kind that takes a full Sunday to read, with a print edition that ran to 4,000 words and an online version with accompanying documents. Raymond Hollis had sat down with the journalist, a woman named Patricia Chen who had spent 20 years covering organized crime, and given a full account. His voice recorder was on the table. His lawyer was in the room. His daughter, who was now 30, he held his hand for the first part of the interview and then, at her father's request, stepped outside. He described the night the affidavit was signed. He described the visit he had received beforehand. He described what he had been shown and what he had been told and how he had signed his name to a lie because he loved his daughter and was a coward and had spent 9 years trying not to think about a 20-year-old architecture student who had gone to the FBI because he believed in something. The medical examiner's independent forensic review found, as Elena had expected it would, that the physical evidence for Marco's death was not inconsistent with a homicide that had been staged to resemble a fall. It was not proof, it was ambiguous. It was the kind of finding that lives in the gray spaces where truth is visible but not prosecutable. But it was there, on record, attached to his name. Dominic Caruso was not indicted, he was not prosecuted. He remained legally untouched. He resigned from the Hartwell Foundation's board of directors 6 weeks after the article ran. No statement was given. The resignation was accepted without comment. There were rumors in the circles that trade in such things that something had changed in him, that he had become harder to read, that he spent more time alone, that he had begun, for reasons no one could precisely articulate, to make certain donations, anonymously through intermediaries, to a scholarship fund at a school of architecture in the Bronx. Nobody could prove that either. Elena Vasquez returned to practicing law, not federal prosecution. She opened a small firm specializing in wrongful death cases. Cases where families had lost someone and the official account of that loss did not match the truth they knew in their bones. She was very good at it. She was, people said, extraordinarily patient. Every Sunday she made a phone call, not to anyone, not anymore. But she sat by the window of her apartment and she looked at the city that Marco had loved. The geometry of it, the towers and angles and the improbable optimism of all those human beings deciding to build upward. And she stayed in that quiet for a while. And then she got back to work. Some debts are not paid in courtrooms. Some are paid in the truth, spoken clearly, in a room full of chandeliers to the man who believed he would never have to hear it. 3 words. That was all it took, because the right 3 words, Ian said to the right person at the right moment. After 11 years of preparation, of patience, of refusing to let a 20-year-old boy who wanted to build schools simply become a closed file, can bring down something that no prosecution ever could. Not the empire, but the man inside it. And sometimes that is enough.